Hello and welcome to a brand new Parry's Pickups. Thank you for joining us today. On today's show we've got a bit of a mixed bag again. I've been to Glasgow last weekend, hence why there wasn't an episode of Parry's Pickups. But that did help me fuel this episode. So without further ado, we're going to start off with a box Super Nintendo game, Super Soccer. Perhaps not the most exciting box Super Nintendo game, but it's, you don't necessarily find these about so often. Maybe you do with Super Soccer, because I discovered that good friend and fellow podcaster Matt Boyle also has a box copy of Super Soccer. This has, where is it? The little sticker still on there. I don't think I've ever had a Super Nintendo game in as good condition as this. Which is interesting. It comes with a little bag there. Original bag, I suppose. It's pretty cool. Instruction manual. Which, even for just a football game, it was just a football game. Thin colour. You don't get that anymore, do you? Now, as well as that, of course, all the other inserts, customer information and precautions booklet. Yes, that's about all you get now, if anything. And a little leaflet. Very nice, looks like it's never been touched before. I've never seen one of these before. Just talking about some of the games you can get for the Super Nintendo. Coming soon. What's coming soon? SimCity and A Link to the Past was coming soon at this point. So you got F-Zero Super Tennis, Super Soccer, Super R-Type, SimCity, A Link to the Past. These were the early days of the Super Nintendo. So enough about the packaging. What about the game? Well, Super Soccer is a very aesthetically pleasing video game. Beautiful graphics, a nice use of scaling, I suppose you'd call it. Is it mode 7 or not? I'm not quite sure, but it certainly looks a bit 3D, which is very nice. And it's got great music, great presentation, pretty easy to get into. The first time I played this, so I did struggle a little bit. I found the AI to be pretty good, and I was playing England versus Germany, and I was beaten quite considerably. I think on the next time I played it, I managed to score a goal, so I was at least getting the hang of it, but I actually found the gameplay rather enjoyable. Other than some initial confusion over what buttons to press, but I guess I've got the instructions, I could have really referred to them. I think this is a good game. I think this is quite a unique football game actually, because a lot of them take the overhead view. This takes a sort of looking down the pitch type of view, with this like 3D effect. I really rather like it. Now this cost me £10 from a store in Glasgow. This is an independent video games retailer, which I keep forgetting the name of, but it's on Union Street in Glasgow, and it's near all the other shops like FOP and CEX and Game and Tokyo Toys. So it's on that street, and it was really nice service there, I have to say so. And a reasonable selection of games too. So check them out. Next up from the same store, may I add, I got NHL Rock the Rink. So I'm a fan of more arcade style sports games, ones that are easy to pick up and play and don't require much knowledge of the sport. So I thought this would be right up my alley. So I played a little bit of this yesterday, and I didn't actually get to play much of it. I was having some problems capturing the footage, unfortunately. For some reason, I couldn't... the actual gameplay footage would not record, which was unusual. The television was saying some sort of resolution issues, but I thought I'd actually managed to get it to work in the end. When I look back at the footage, anything after the FMV introduction didn't record, and I was just faced with a grey screen. So you're going to have to go on my description of this, I'm afraid. So, as you see for the intro, this is pretty full-on, exciting, no-holds-barred hockey game. The gameplay should technically be fast and furious, as you might expect from a game that boasts madness on ice and wrestling-like finishing moves. And I think those things are there, but when the frame rate is as low as it is, then it kind of ruins the whole experience. And I don't know if maybe playing this through a PS2 isn't giving me the correct experience. I've usually had no other problems playing PS1 games on a PS2. They seem to work absolutely fine. I wonder if this game just has a terrible frame rate. So it feels slow and jerky, but the core gameplay feels solid and enjoyable. But I just can't quite get over the frame rate on this game. It does chug along, and it really shouldn't. The graphics seem rather good, and definitely of a high resolution, but there's no speed. Well, there is a lack of speed at least. So, this was $4.99. I'm a little bit disappointed with it, to be honest. If any of you guys are familiar with this game, let me know your experiences on it. And yeah, that's NHL Rock the Rink. I was hoping this could be the one, the NHL game for me, the one I will have as my go-to NHL game on the PlayStation. But I may have to look for another alternative now. Next up, in a first for Parry's Pickups, is actually a game we've already featured. Oh, just for a different format. So, if you remember way back when, in the first Parry's Pickups to include gameplay footage, I talked a little bit about the GameCube version of Tetris Worlds. For those not in the know, and I don't know if I've ever quite mentioned it since talking about this game, I'm really into collecting Tetris games at the moment. I just picked up Tetris 64 for the N64 yesterday. Tetris 64 for the N64, believe it. Of course it is. So this is another one, evidently. And the artwork on this PS2 version is slightly different to that of the GameCube and Xbox versions. It's actually the same as the Game Boy Advance version. This is Roger Dean artwork, and what I didn't realise when I last talked about this game, I said that Roger Dean did the logo for Tetris Worlds. It goes further than that. Roger Dean actually designed the original Tetris logo. And for those not familiar with Roger Dean, he does great fantasy-style landscapes, and he's very famous for doing most of the Yes album covers. So there it is, Tetris Worlds. So is there anything different about the PS2 version of Tetris Worlds compared to the GameCube version? And I think there may be. I think the menus might look slightly different. I'm not sure if it's got all the same options. There are 6 variations on Tetris, and it's got the multiplayer mode, so I think it's pretty much the same. But something I never actually tried out on the GameCube version of Tetris Worlds was the story mode. And the story mode really doesn't seem to be much of a story mode, but it is interesting nonetheless. So, in this mode, you play Tetris like normal. You go up levels, but when it is game over, you're left, depending on how well you've done, you've rescued these little cube-like characters. Now, when you start a game, you choose one of these cube characters to be sort of like your helper. Now, by helper, they just kind of float there and say things. I mentioned before, they say in the female one at least sings in a rather seductive fashion. You know, like single and double and Tetris. So that's always entertaining, I find. But yes, as you game over, depending on how well you've done, you'll have rescued other of these cube characters, and then also the background will change slightly. It starts off like a barren landscape, and it grows. So plants grow, and the sun comes out, and then you start again. But it maintains your progress from before. So then the next time you play, depending on where you do, the world gets a little bit more greener, a little bit more vegetation grows, and you rescue more of these characters. So I imagine if you were to stick with this, you might actually get an ending. You would eventually get to... I assume it's probably when you've done like level 15, which would be the normal... the one that I'm most familiar with as being the last level of Tetris. because it does get pretty difficult around here. You struggle on level 11 on Tetris. But I really like this idea that it is sort of a story mode in quite a creative fashion, I feel. So it's a great game. I picked this up from CX in Glasgow for £1. £1 is money well spent when it comes to Tetris. I do really like this entry into the series. I recommend it to anybody who's got a PS2 who wants a game of Tetris. Don't turn your nose up at Tetris Worlds because it's a great variation on the theme, and whatever console you've got, you can probably get a version of Tetris Worlds for it. If you've got a GameCube, a Xbox, PS2, or a Game Boy Advance, that is. So there is Tetris Worlds. Moving on to the final game we're going to talk about in this episode. And for those listening to the Tom Matt Attack podcast, you'll have heard a little bit about this game on there. You'll also have heard recently that I've been playing Persona 4, which is an RPG, something I don't usually partake in. I usually find RPGs to be a little bit drawn out and lacking in the gameplay area. But something about this next game piqued my interest, and that game is Xenoblade Chronicles X, a massive RPG. Crazy! I will never complete this game. I know that right now. Saying that, I have played a couple of hours on it, done the prologue and the first sort of mission. I kind of like the way the game's split up into bite-sized chunks. So you can play for about an hour and you've done a chapter, which is kind of cool. It's a pretty simple story. Your planet, you're escaping from your planet, which has been under attack by alien forces. You're on this big spaceship. The spaceship crashes into another planet. Several of the survivors have been jettisoned off into little pods. You play one of these survivors who's awakened by another character who finds you, and you've got a memory loss. And she introduces you to this settlement they've made on this planet they've landed on. After you travel there through a beautiful landscape full of these exotic creatures which you can either choose to ignore or battle against. Now, sometimes you can't escape getting into a battle with one of these creatures, and some creatures are a bit more violent than others. But there is an emphasis on this game in trying to live together with the creatures on this planet, which is where you have settled. And then once you've done that bit, you arrive in the main city, where you're introduced to this idea of getting a job as a blade. Now, blade would be, they take on missions. It sort of reminds me of the Guardians in Destiny. It's actually, to me, it feels very similar to that. There are elements of Evangelion in this as well, I feel, and Phantasy Star Online. I just feel this is a combination of a lot of that sort of sci-fi anime stuff, for want of a better word. It's really nice to look at. What does strike you is when you get into the wide open world of the game, that it seems to go on forever. It seems to be quite immense and seems to be a lot to explore, which is what attracted me to this game. It's not as linear as some RPGs. You know, you can kind of go, you're not stuck on a set path. At least it didn't feel like that at the beginning when I entered the big main field. But then as you get into the city, you're a very strict sort of story-based chapter where you're introduced to all the elements of the game. You're introduced to this board that you go to collect your missions as a blade. In fact, you haven't even decided at this point whether you want to take on the mantle of a blade. And I feel that that's inevitably going to happen. But there's a few other things introduced. Like there's, I think a new leader has been announced. Like the vice president of this organisation has been promoted, and no one's really quite sure about him and his intentions. So there is something of a story developing now in the game, and I think it's really quite promising, actually. I like the fact you got to kind of design your own character at the beginning. You can design the facial features, the build, male, female. And that was cool, I thought. Not all games give you that level of customization. It feels like you can tailor this experience a little bit, which I really like. You know, you can put your own mark on it as an RPG, as opposed to, you know, this is a story, you're just going to play through it and read the text. Uh, so I think this is very promising, and it feels very unique. It's like nothing I've ever played before. And for those who maybe aren't the biggest RPG fans, I'd say it might be worth you trying this out, because I think it's. I feel like it's reasonably good sort of beginner. I say beginner, but I have heard this game is absolutely massive in scale, so that might put you off. But for me, so far, it feels quite accessible. The battle system is a sort of real-time thing where it's not turn-based. You sort of select an attack, and then the attack automatically occurs. So you set the machine gun, and you just keep constantly firing machine gun until you change to another weapon. And then while you're doing that, you can move around the enemies to avoid their attacks. It works reasonably well, but I didn't feel like in some cases I was actually making much of an impact. And it was hard to tell because I was with another more experienced character at the time, and I wasn't sure whether they were dealing more damage than me. So I still got to get used to this battling system, but it seems action orientated but restrictive. So not, I'd kind of like it be a little bit more interactive than it is, but I think it is trying to strike a balance between being a turn-based and a real-time, but never being too action-orientated. It's interesting. Anyway, I got this game from CEX in Glasgow for £15, and that was like the highest I would have considered paying for it, because I'm a little bit hesitant going into RPGs. I've seen this game on sale, in-game actually, for £25. That would have been a little bit too steep with me. I don't think I would have taken a chance on it. But at 15, I thought this was going to be a good game to add to my Wii U collection. Give me a more traditional type RPG in that games library. So that's Xenoblade Chronicles X. And that brings me to the end of the episode. Thanks so much for checking out the video. Really do appreciate you taking the time to watch these. I hope you get something from them, as I've said before in the past. And if you've got any comments on how I might be able to improve these videos, do let me know. So until we meet again, game on.